Okay, hi everybody. Welcome, welcome. We are at the Demystifying Disability Speaker Series. We have a wonderful community member and advocate here with us. My name is Brianna. I use they, them pronouns. I am from the Hoanghtowhan Nation. I also identify as disabled. And we are with the UPRISE Collective, which is a nonprofit, community-based organization in the Portland metro area. Part of our Demystifying Disability Speaker Series is unpacking and understanding systemic barriers that disabled people face going through life. So we've talked about everything from understanding how psilocybin impacts us, understanding how Social Security disability insurance works. We've done digital work with different organizations. We've talked about primary care providers and how to engage with them. We talked about psychiatric care and facilities. So, really excited tonight to talk about climate crisis and understanding how to engage in advocacy for yourself, for those around you, for those you love that are disabled, that have to flee or have to move during climate crisis and disaster situations. So, really excited to have Mary with us. Um, and for those of you that are joining us live, feel free to put your questions in the chat as Mary is talking or your comments. Feel free to use your reaction buttons. It's really helpful when we see that folks are interested and engaged and all that fun stuff. Thanks, Jinya, for that example. And so you're welcome to keep your camera off or turn it on wherever you feel comfortable with. And I will go ahead and read out the questions as Mary is sharing. And yeah, let us know if there's anything else that you need. We have an ASL interpreter. You're welcome to pin to your screen. You're also able to turn on auto captioning for yourself if that's something that is useful to you. Um, and if you have any questions throughout the event, you're welcome to message me privately or put it in the chat for everyone to see. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Mary. Thank you so much for being here. Longtime friend of UPRISE. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much, UPRISE, for inviting me to speak today. Before I begin, I want to be clear that these experiences and perspectives shared today are my own, shaped by my lived experience as a disabled and chronically ill woman of color. My name is Mary Fashik. My pronouns are she, her. My visual description is that I am a Lebanese woman with Palestinian ancestry. I have short, dark, curly hair. I'm wearing glasses, headphones, and a light gray top. I am the founder of Inaccessible, a disability justice movement, and the author of Adventurous Adeline and the Back to School Party. I've spent years advocating at the intersection of race, disability, and justice. I was adopted from Beirut, Lebanon as a baby, and I grew up in Miami, Florida. My first experience with a hurricane was in high school when Hurricane Andrew hit in 1992. Now, I admit, as a teenager, hearing that there's a hurricane coming and you don't have school for who knows how long was a little bit exciting. But again, it was my first hurricane. I was a teenager. I was just short of my 15th birthday. It might have been a little bit after my 15th birthday. Um, we were very fortunate. My adoptive parents and I lived in a house that did not take the full force of Andrew. At the very last minute, the storm turned and hit South Miami instead. The early experience did not prepare me for what I would face many years later. When I moved to coastal Georgia in 2005, hurricanes became more frequent. I will say that I live in Brunswick, Georgia. Brunswick is about an hour north of Jacksonville, Florida, and an hour south of Savannah. And we are right on the coast. So storms, when they are headed this way, a lot of times hit our area with full force. The first time my roommate and I had to evacuate, we had no idea where to go. Imagine a huge, impactful storm bearing down where you're living, and you have no idea. We did not know that we were going to have to evacuate until the morning. The, that morning, they told everyone that you had to evacuate. We considered crossing state lines because that was the only place we could find a hotel room. But that didn't work out. So we started to look for shelters. We found one in Valdosta, which is 2 hours west of where we are. The first shelter we found was a medical shelter, but it was only for hospital and nursing home patients. The next shelter we found was at maximum capacity, but we were told that they were going to be opening another shelter and where that shelter was located. We eventually made it there. The room where we slept in had cots, like army cots, the green cots. If you ever have watched the old TV show MASH, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The cot I was given the first night was unbearable. I was in too much pain to sleep and could not physically turn over because it was so small. I ended up sleeping in my wheelchair from the early morning hours on. One of the shelter administrators said that they had what was called, quote unquote, a special needs cot. That cot was only a few inches wider than the cot that everyone else was using. I could not sleep in that one either. One of the volunteers at the shelter was kind enough to go home and bring me an air mattress, which made a huge difference, but also made me the center of attention because why does he get to sleep on an air mattress and we have to sleep on cot? But on the third day, even though our county was still not letting people return, the shelter announced it was closing. We had to scramble to find a hotel. This is the reality for so many disabled folks. We're told to evacuate, but there's no real plan for what happens afterwards or after a few days even. The next year we had to evacuate again. This time it was for Hurricane Matthew. I brought my own air mattress, but the volunteers weren't trained to help lower me to the floor or assist me in getting back up. Even though I explained multiple times, it felt like no one was listening. I ended up with bruises on my arms and injuries to my knees and hips. It took almost 9 months of physical therapy to recover. That shelter experience also threw my body into a flare that I did not realize that's what it was at the time. After that, I was diagnosed with the first of many chronic illnesses. The shelter environment meant to be a place of safety was actually quite harmful. As a disabled woman of color, I've lived through more hurricanes than I can count. I've experienced firsthand what it feels like to be viewed as an afterthought in a crisis. We're not just left out, we are actively excluded by systems that assume a non-disabled norm. And this happens more commonly to those who are black and brown and the most multi-marginalized. Let's talk about some of the common ways emergency planning fails us. There's often no accessible transportation or clear evacuation routes for disabled people. Communication is not always accessible, whether that means no ASL interpretation, no captioning, or no plain language opportunities. Some shelters do not have refrigeration for medications or enough power outages, power outlets for those who need to plug in things such as medical devices or wheelchairs or other mobile devices as well. On top of that, shelters tend to close, as I mentioned, after 2 or 3 days, even when people still can't safely return home, leaving folks with nowhere to go. Several uh, of my experiences, we were the first experience, we were not aware that the shelter would close before our county reopened. So there we are. It's actually almost funny, but almost not funny that they told us to go to Planet Fitness where we could shower. They were allowing um girls and shelters to use their showers. So we went to go take a shower and we were told by shelter officials, go out, the weather is nice today, go enjoy your day. So we went to go take a shower and then we just went to the mall just so we could have some feeling of normalcy even though we weren't home. We returned to the shelter. We're about to have lunch when they tell us they will be closing the shelter in a couple hours. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know where to go. We called many hotels. Many were booked. There was a hotel across the street from the shelter, not in the safest neighborhood. And they had one room open, and we just needed it for one night because we knew after that we would be able to come home. So we took the room. The bed was as hard as sleeping on plywood, but it was better than sleeping in a shelter. That was my experience. So when we evacuated from Matthew, and I knew they were going to close the shelter prior to us being able to return home, because the county that we live in, Glen County, was hit so hard that we knew it would be a couple of days before we were able to return home. I found a hotel for us to stay in, but not everyone has funds. Not everyone has financial privilege to be able to rent a hotel room for 2 to 3 days or even longer. We were privileged enough, I was privileged enough that my roommate's parents helped us financially, but not everyone has that privilege. So what happens to those people who get kicked out of a shelter and don't have anywhere to go when they can't return home? And if you do return home, you may not have power you need, and the power that you need to refrigerate your medication or to keep you cool. Um, I have asthma. I must remain cool if I get too warm. I have severe asthma attacks. So there are so many factors that play into that. The climate crisis disproportionately affects disabled people, particularly black and brown and native disabled individuals. Studies have shown that we are 2 to 4 times more likely to die in natural disasters or in climate disasters. I will say that while my focus is on hurricanes, we recently saw this with the fires in California as well. And those are even scarier than hurricanes because with hurricanes, you have at least 2 to 3 days of preparation. With the fires, you're going to have that. As I mentioned before, many of us rely on electricity to power ventilators and other medical devices. When power goes out, it's not just inconvenient, it can be life-threatening. On top of that, the stress of displacement and the lack of accommodations can lead to serious medical flares, especially for folks with chronic illnesses. And like I said, well, my personal experience focuses on hurricanes. The conversation applies just as urgently to wildfires and other climate emergencies. Fires move quickly if you don't have access to reliable transportation, if the shelters don't accommodate your needs, or there's no way to safely store your medication or charge your equipment, you're in danger. Just like hurricanes, wildfires expose the deep cracks in our emergency response systems and highlight how disabled lives are deprioritized in the face of crisis. We are always, always an afterthought. Always. That is why we need to bring a disability justice lens to a climate crisis response. It's not just about surviving storms, it's about rethinking the systems that are failing us over and over again. disability justice seekers consider the needs of those most impacted, to value lived experience and understand how systems of oppression overlap, including race, class, gender, disability. The framework calls for community-based solutions, mutual aid, and collective care. It demands that we shift from a charity model to one rooted in equity and accountability. So what needs to change? Emergency planning must begin with disabled people at the table, not as an afterthought. Policy must require shelters, transportation, and communication to be accessible. Staff and volunteers need disability competency training. They need to be familiar with disability and chronic illness and how to interact with folks who are disabled and chronically ill. And we need real investment in local infrastructure, including a home preparedness and mutual aid networks that are led by and for disabled people. If you're disabled or chronically ill, there are a few things that you can do if you're able to in order to prepare. Research accessible shelters and transportation in your county and surrounding areas. You must register with your county prior to hurricane season. This is something I was not aware of before my first major storm here in Glenn County. You must register prior to hurricane season. Hurricane season, I believe, begins June 1st, so you must register prior to that. Research, um, also, if you have food allergies or dietary restrictions, let's talk about this. I have a gluten allergy. What they provide you in the shelter, if you have any sort of dietary restriction, any sort of food allergy, they do not cater quote unquote to your allergy. In other words, the food is not accessible to you. So bring shelf-stable food with you for several days. Pack all the medical equipment you need and medications. Um, Again, my first experience, I have lymphedema in my legs. I have to use a lymphedema pump every day. Our first time evacuating, I did not take my lymphedema pump with me because I did not think it was allowed in the shelter. I know better now, and we have brought it every time since. So bring everything you need. Don't forget chargers for your phone, any mobile devices, any medical devices, your wheelchair, anything that may require charging. Make sure you bring your chargers with you. Also, build a support network. Check in with each other before and after storms if you are able. We deserve to live. We deserve to be planned for. We are not disposable, and any climate response that excludes us is a failed response. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. Folks, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourself. Um, yeah, I think like I also have a lymphedema pump, and that is something that like it's all of those equipment pieces are really heavy and hard to carry. So I'm curious also if you have tips and tricks for um, when you leave a shelter and need to find like a hotel or something where you have lots of equipment and possibly, a power chair or things like that, should people be researching ahead of time what hotels are accessible and where those things are? Do you have any advice for that?
I think, if you know the general area where you are going to be sheltered, um, that is when I would begin to look for accessible hotel rooms because as we know, the accessible rooms go first. And many hotels only have two or three at the most. Um, so I will say there was a third hurricane after Matthew that we evacuated for. At that point, I knew I had a gluten allergy. I was severely immunocompromised. And we knew we were just going to look for a hotel. So what we did was we booked the hotel. We knew like a week before, okay, this storm may be coming this way. So what we did was we booked the hotel, and if the storm moved or it was going to be out a few days further, we just kept changing the reservation. And that's very inconvenient, I do know that. But that's what we did. And we ended up staying at a hotel. And we did like, again, we were privileged to be able to do this. We did Instacart so I was able to have food that I was able to eat. Because I will say, if you do not have any food allergies or food sensitivities, in a Red Cross shelter, the first night you are there, you are given a drink and a bag of chips and cookies. That is all you are given the first night in a Red Cross shelter. They do not feed you meals until the day after. If you oversleep or sleep through a meal, you will not get fed as well.
Thank you for that, Mary. Yeah, I think about that a lot, especially just those rooms where there's only like one or two or three rooms at a hotel. I was recently at a hotel that said it was accessible and the elevators didn't fit a power chair. And so, we had to go completely around the build. I was with someone who used a power chair and we had to go completely outside and around the building to get into the lobby. And they only had one room that was accessible. So knowing your hotels is like a really important thing. Thank you for sharing that. Does anyone have any other questions?
Gosh, I thank you so much, Mary. My name is Jenya. I use she and my pronouns. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Um, um, I grew up on the island of Guam, which has a lot of typhoons. And thankfully, most of the homes on Guam are built out of concrete, you know. And but if you are in a home that um, uh, is either wood or tin. We typically would go to the schools for shelter. But when listening to your story, I'm such a systems thinker. Part of me is like, how many years of like disasters have we had? And, how many years have we had emergency management systems? And why is it still, folks, are still having to be like, how are you not ready for someone like me? Right? Like, this isn't your first time having this happen. And it's just to me like, It's just so shameful that it, at the top there isn't some kind of checklist of shelters must be dot 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 dot, right? Like like when I think of event planning, like making sure the site is right for all of our participants, things like that, right? Really actually making sure that people can actually get through the doors and can actually go through the bathroom and curb cuts and everything. And part of me is just like, how do they not have a checklist to make sure, right, that anybody can come through? Um, yeah, it's one of those like, I don't have a question. I'm just so sorry that our system sucks so much that they still haven't figured it out. And yeah, it's one of those like what can I do, right? Like I guess that's my question of what can I do to like advocate, or like who do I need to call or like, right?
You
But
know, I wish I had the answer to that
I
question because,
know,
like,
so
what
hard.
you're right, what can we do? Because for me, the biggest thing is how do they expect someone with limited mobility like myself to sleep on a cot that is like maybe 3 feet wide? Like,
Yeah,
and then they they trot out this special needs
yeah,
card that I will tell you someone high up in the system said to me, "Oh, we all consider this the Rolls Royce of cars," and it was only like this much, like a few inches bigger than the other one. Like like he said to me, "Oh, that's the one that we all want when we have to do emergency management, whatever." And
mm.
I'm like, "Well, you can have it because like,
Right? It's like, well, you sleep on it, but it's not gonna work for me.
yeah,
Oh my
yeah."
goodness.
It's just like those with, like I said, limited mobility, we need I need a mattress that's big. I need to be able to turn over. I need help turning over. I need help even getting on, if I wasn't asleep on my cot, getting on my cot. I mean, there's no training. I know that they hire community volunteers, but it's like, I don't qualify for the medical shelter, which is what I would need, right? I don't qualify for that because I'm not in a living facility. I'm not a hospital patient. And, you know, my I remember the one that we went to for Matthew. They did have like a nurse there, and she saw me, and she brought me into the little room, and she took my vitals, and she's like, very like talking to me like I'm five, very like infantilizing me. Like, are you okay? Do you have medication? Do you know when you're supposed to take your medication? So, like, I need something between that and, like, nothing at all.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. You're speaking to so many important things. I think too, oftentimes we think about climate and disaster preparedness in kind of like one set way. And we think about like, okay, it's going to happen and we're going to be able to go home and get all our stuff and do these things. But like many of us also might be in the store or might be at work or might be in the car or might be at a doctor's office, right? And so I specifically think about employment a lot, right? For those of us that are employed that spend a lot of time out of the house, like jobs don't necessarily have emergency evacuation plans for us. And we've seen that kind of in recent years come to some headlines both like schools and employers, right? Like school systems too. And I know like even like the university that I went to, most of the buildings aren't accessible. They don't have
I would like
elevators.
to speak
Yeah,
to your point about
yeah.
this. Okay, I'm very old, so uh, I grew up in the 80s. I was at elementary school in the 80s. You know, in the 80s, the biggest fear was earthquakes. Like, I'm not sure why we thought we would get an earthquake in Miami, but for some reason, we had an earthquake drill, right? But all of my classmates went under the desk, and my teacher just left me. And, like, you know, like, oh well, like, I was gonna be, you know, like, whatever. It was just, I was gonna be collateral damage because I couldn't get under my desk. So we're talking like 40 years ago now, and 40 years later, we're still talking about this. At my local hospital, I went and I asked, what is your evacuation plan for fires? You didn't even ask about goodness forbid, like a shooting or anything like that. I asked about what is your evacuation plan for fires. No one at the hospital could answer my question. And then I went and talked to security. Security told me, go sit, go sit in the stairwell and someone will eventually come for you. Just make sure that someone knows you're there. Why? So I can die in the stairwell? Or so they can carry me down flights of stairs and leave my $28,000 motorized wheelchair in a burning building? I mean, this is what we saw in 9/11, right? Like, we have, you know, we've been talking about this for years. What happens? What happens if I'm in a grocery store and God forbid there's an active shooter? Like, who are they gonna go at? Me become the easiest target. So I have to say this, and this might come up harsh, but this is reality. Having something in your child's IEP is not going to save your child from an active shooter. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I saw a lot of parents on social media say, well, put in your child's IEP about them getting out first or whatever. That is not going to save your child. I'm sorry. In a time of active shooter or a fire or whatever the case may be, the idea is to save as many as possible, meaning those non-disabled children who can run. That is a harsh, harsh truth, and I come out very blatant in saying that, but it is the truth. It won't. Unfortunately, we are always left behind. We are always forgotten, and it starts from elementary school, and it goes all the way through adulthood. That we are just, we're not the focus, we're not the center, we are not important. We are not important. Our lives are seen as expendable. And we saw that with we've seen that for the past, what, 5 years now? That our lives are expendable. We don't. Our lives are not important to others. And our lives should not be expendable. But I just have to say, you know, like, I remember in high school, my high school in Miami had 2 floors. Youth high school. We have 4,000 kids in my high school. And when we would have fire drills, they would come get all the disabled kids before the fire drill and take us outside. And I remember even then I was always aware, always had a sarcastic tone, but even then I said, "Oh, are you gonna know 10 minutes before a fire to come get us out?" Like, I'm glad that you brought it up because that's something that really also needs to be talked about as well.
Yeah, and I think when we're thinking about climate change and disaster in general, the decisions that are being made in our current political climate are just going to exacerbate climate change. And the protections that are kind of being stripped, even the proposal of stripping some of the 504 protections, like there's a lot going on politically that here, Mary, you're sharing this like beautiful, tragic story of like experiences of all these hurricanes while those protections were in place, while we were believing that climate change was real. And now we're moving into an era where those things aren't real. And so, just I have a lot of gratitude for the stories that you've shared. And hopefully, folks can learn through your experience, both hopefully decision makers, but also community members that are experiencing similar things, feeling a little less alone. Um, yeah, I don't know. Did anyone have any other questions? Or, yeah, Mary, do you have other thoughts that you want to share?
No, I'm happy to take any other questions. I just want to say, you know, like I said, these are just my personal experiences, and my personal opinions. So I don't want I often get accused of speaking for the community as a whole. That is not what I'm doing. I'm just sharing my personal thoughts, opinions, and experiences.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much, Mary. I really appreciate you sharing your story and being vulnerable in the sense of sharing your true self. I know that's oftentimes challenging, especially if you've been told that your story doesn't matter or that it's an individual experience. Which and I just want to also uplift you and say, like, your voice matters, and it makes me really sad that this society is in a place where um, the value of a life in any life isn't being acknowledged and is being disregarded. And recently, I got injured and was on crutches for a little bit, and that's what really kind of awoke in me. And perspective is based on experience, and we need your stories. We need your story to be told, and we need to hear it. I also have invisible disabilities, and it's oftentimes disregarded. Like you said, I can sympathize and empathize in that sense, however, not to the extent, of course. But just to go back to Gina's comment as to like, what can we do as far as like, is there like I know legislation is probably where it's starting with this political climate. It's so uncertain. Um, but I guess like, yeah, my question is like, what can we do as individuals to uplift your voice, uplift everyone else's voices who have been disregarded, to 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 see some change. And I'm not naive in the sense that, like, thinking that it's going to take one thing, or it's going to take these steps. But also, I'd like to know how we can be in solidarity with you in this time and the times to come.
Well, I thank you for one, and also I want to say, reach out to your emergency management, your local emergency management, and say what what plan do you have in place for disabled residents of this county? Ask questions. They hate to be asked questions because they don't have answers. You can't. I know everyone says don't poke the bear. I'm opposite. Poke the bear. Continue to poke the bear. Make the bear angry so that they do something. quote the bit constantly. I also want to say one of the things I talk about so often is to center the most marginalized voices. So often I work on social media, and those who are being uplifted are white, palatable, disabled people. I'm not white and I'm not palatable, and I'm okay with not being palatable. I'd rather not be palatable than just being palatable to everyone. But society wants that cutesy Barbie look, you know, oh, look at them. They're like, and listen, nothing wrong with being an influencer. I'm not one. I'm an activist. That's who I am. But I look to influencers for influencer topics, but look at activists like who are doing the grassroots work, who are trying to move our community forward. One thing I say at the end of my podcast, disability is political. Disability is not palatable, nor does it have to be. And that's just it. I'm not palatable, nor do I have to be. I'm definitely not palatable because I don't sound like everyone else. I don't look like everyone else. And that's okay. The other thing I want to say is this, and this is something I say at every speaking engagement podcast. Every time I will say this, and I will end on this unless there's any other questions. Disability intersects at every identity, and until society and the government recognize and honor our whole identities, we will never achieve collective liberation. I'm going to say that again. Disability intersects at every identity, and until society and the government recognize and honor our whole identities, we will never achieve collective liberation.
Thank you so much, Mary. I feel like we need to have like the hashtag that you just shared on a shirt. Like that whole sentence, but also just like hashtag don't be palatable. Um, because I think about that a lot, right? Like who gets believed in a space is who's palatable to the status quo. And so I appreciate the poke the bear. Um, I do like we're heading into our end of our time together, and I just want to see if anyone else has questions, thoughts, or feelings that they want to share. And of course, lots of gratitude to you, Mary, for being here.
I'll just share really quickly. Mary, you got me with that palatable. I just started tearing up. And I do want a t-shirt. I want to be the first one to buy it. Um, like let's just yeah, unapologetically unpalatable.
I will make a shirt with that quote or with what I said. I will make one. I will send it over to UPRISE so um they can promote it. I do have one that says collective liberation equals disability justice. Because without disability justice and intersectionality, we will not have collective liberation. If yet activism is not intersectional, is it really activism? Is it okay if I plug one thing before we go?
Yes, I was gonna say, please plug your book, plug your podcast, and tell people how to get in touch with you. Our ASL interpreter has a hard stop in about 5 minutes, but thank you, Karen, also for being here and making it more
Okay.
accessible.
Oh, my background is blurred. I'm so
You got it,
sorry.
Mary.
Hold on. Let me unblur my background. I'm really sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, here is my book. It's Adventurous Adeline and your back to school party. If all of you could buy a copy of 2 or 3, get one in your local library, your school library. Give one to people with kids, adults. I would really, really appreciate it. I'm very proud of this. If you buy one, you may get a special copy that says series. Unfortunately, it will no longer be a series. Um, but support me. This is important. No matter what happened to the series, this one's important. I really appreciate the support. Um, you can follow me at Mary Fashik, MaryFashik, on Instagram and on Threads. And my podcast is called The Politics of Disability. I haven't done any new episodes, but there will be some new ones coming out, but there's lots of important ones. There are 2.5 seasons or 2 seasons posted. You can access it on Spotify or anywhere you access podcasts. So that's it. That's my plug. Please follow me. Please buy a book. Give the podcast a listen. I want to thank you and thank UPRISE Collective for having me. I always enjoy doing this, no matter how late it is on the East Coast. Um, I always enjoy doing this. So thank you so much again for having me.
Thanks, Mary. We appreciate you and all the work you do. Yeah, give Mary a follow. She posts some great stuff. So, thank you all for being here.